AITA for refusing to continue the family tradition and being accused of ruining everything. My entire life, my family has had a strong tradition that has endured across generations. We're a family of bakers, but not just any bakers. For as long as anyone can remember, we have been renowned for the Peterson family bread recipe. It's a secret formula that's been passed down through the years, always closely guarded and paramount to our identities. Our bread isn't just a food item. It's become a symbol of our lineage, our pride, and our unity. Growing up, my siblings and I practically lived in the bakery, which sits cozily on the corner of Main Street in our small town. We learned the ins and outs of baking well before we even entered school. My older sister Sarah was a natural, always ready to take on the challenge, while my younger brother Jason loved working the register and chatting up the locals as our bread flew off the shelves. For me, however, it was always different. I absorbed the skills, yes, but my heart wasn't in the dough or the ovens. I had different dreams. I wanted to become a writer. Whenever I tried broaching the subject with my parents, they'd gently but firmly remind me of how baking was our family's love language, a tradition that couldn't just fizzle out. I kept my dreams to myself, enabling me to maintain my status quo while writing in secret. It wasn't enough, but it allowed me some measure of solace. Time went on, and as expected, my sister became more deeply involved in the business, while my brother was on his way to taking over the more social aspects. I continued to keep up appearances to satisfy the family. Then came the day my parents sat us down with solemn expressions. My father had recently been diagnosed with a heart condition, and my parents decided it was time for them to retire. They wanted to pass the torch to the three of us, keeping the bakery thriving for many years to come. It wouldn't have been a huge shock to anyone if a wave of anxiety hadn't instantly crashed over me. While Sarah and Jason were eager to dive in, I was torn. I couldn't let go of my dreams. Despite feeling trapped, I knew the moment had come for me to finally be honest. That night, after dinner, I approached my parents in the quiet of their living room. "I'm not meant for the bakery life," I confessed. "I want to write. I want to explore the world through stories, not recipes. This is what I've always wanted." My mother looked at me as if I'd just announced an intent to sail off into the abyss. My father, usually reserved, failed to hide his disappointment. "What will happen to the family tradition?" asked my mother, her gaze steady and probing. "You have Sarah and Jason," I replied. "They're perfect for it. They'll keep it alive, and our legacy will be safe." The conversation ended abruptly. I could tell they were deeply hurt, feeling like I was betraying our lineage. A few days later, Sarah and Jason confronted me. They couldn't understand my decision either, seeing it as a possible fracture in the family dynamic. Our disagreements simmered, and soon, not only my family but extended relatives joined in. I became the subject of hushed whispers at family gatherings, which I started to dread. The one who didn't want to bake, they called me. Trying to mend what I could, I offered to help them on weekends or during holidays when business was bustling. But it wasn't enough. My parents remained cold, and my siblings frequently accused me of letting them bear too much of the burden while I went chasing childhood fantasies. My writing, once a source of joy, began to feel tainted by guilt. I started questioning if being true to myself was worth the chaos it brought to my family. I attempted to reason, to compromise, even to join in on a part-time basis again, but nothing changed the air of betrayal that hung between us. I penned short stories and submitted articles. Some even started to get published online. Every small success brought a hint of happiness, but also a reminder of the widening chasm between me and those who were supposed to unconditionally support me. A family reunion was organized last weekend as a partial attempt to reconcile. It quickly devolved into a staged intervention with all eyes bearing down on me, as if on trial. "He's breaking the chain," Uncle Ralph said, shaking his head. "Tradition matters," Aunt Lucy chimed in, each word a dart aimed at my regard for them. I left early, feeling defeated and tipped with resentment. Alone and reflective, I've debated endlessly. Am I being selfish, imagining a life outside the walls of the bakery, a life that might not follow the Peterson path but feels truer to myself? Considering everything, I fear I've shattered the unity that held us together. But is a family tradition worth more than one's individuality and dreams? So, Reddit, AITA for choosing my path and refusing to continue with the family tradition even if it may break the ties that bind. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more awesome videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. Thanks for your support. AITA for telling my family I am perfectly fine not speaking to them. I, 28M, have always had a rocky relationship with my family, but things came to a head last month, and I'm genuinely unsure if I am the wrong here. To give some context, it's important to mention that I come from a big family with 3 brothers, Josh 35M, Eric 32M, and Matt 30M, and 1 sister, Sophie 26F. My parents, especially my dad, always had very traditional views about family. Think blood is thicker than water type of mentality. Growing up, it was almost mandatory to attend every family event, no matter what. My siblings seemed fine with this setup, but I struggled with it even from a young age. Academically inclined and introverted, I never really fit into the family dynamic, which revolved around sports and outdoor activities. It always felt like I was the odd one out. My brothers excelled in sports and were quite popular, whereas Sophie and I were always sidelined in that regard. Sophie wasn't much of a fan of sports, but she had her own circle and managed to blend in better than I did. I excelled academically, receiving scholarships and academic awards throughout my school life. But these accomplishments rarely warranted more than a passing acknowledgement at family gatherings, overshadowed by my brother's touchdown or tackle. I always felt like my interests were trivial in comparison, and as the years wore on, this sentiment grew stronger. After finishing high school, I received a scholarship to a top university far from home. The distance provided a much-needed break and allowed me to flourish in an environment where I wasn't constantly second-guessed or overshadowed. I finally felt like I was coming into my own, but my family's lukewarm reception to my academic accomplishments stung. The phone calls decreased, and when they did happen, the conversations were brief and superficial. Needless to say, I didn't miss home much. Fast forward to today, and things still hadn't improved. I recently published a book, something I dreamed of doing for years. In my pride, I sent copies to my family, foolishly believing they would share in my happiness. But the reaction was dishearteningly familiar: silence. It took 2 weeks for anyone to even mention receiving the book, and that was Josh, who merely commented that he had a busy schedule and would get to it when he could. That stung more than being ignored. The breaking point came during a recent family reunion. I attended out of obligation, but almost immediately I felt out of place. Conversations turned toward my brother's recent exploits, be it a new job, a sport, or a vacation. My book was mentioned once in passing, quickly swallowed up by another topic. Halfway through dinner, I excused myself to step outside for some air, overwhelmed by a rush of emotions that I hadn't anticipated. Sophie found me outside. She has always been more empathetic than the rest and had noticed my discomfort. "It's always like that, isn't it?" she said, her eyes reflecting the same frustration that I felt. We talked for a while, and Sophie admitted she also felt like an outsider sometimes, despite being more integrated than I ever was. Feeling encouraged by Sophie's understanding, I made a decision that night. After the dinner, I gathered my family in the living room. Heart pounding, I said, "I appreciate these gatherings, but I often feel overlooked. I don't think I can keep pretending everything's all right." I could see my words taking them by surprise. Perhaps they'd all gotten so used to our family dynamic that they never stopped to consider its impact on me. My dad was the first to recover from the initial shock. "Your family. None of this is personal. It's just how things are," he said dismissively. "But they are personal, at least to me." I tried to explain that, but the words felt futile. "I'm perfectly fine not speaking to the family, as often if this is how things will always be," I said, expecting the repercussions not only from Dad, but from everyone. My brothers rolled their eyes. My mother looked as if she'd been slapped, and Sophie, you could see the conflict on her face, stepped aside, not entirely sure whose side to take at this moment. For the next few days, I remained the villain of the story. I received texts from Josh and Eric telling me I was overreacting and that I shouldn't make such a big deal about things. Mom called, teary, trying to convince me to just ignore all this nonsense because family is everything. But is family everything if you constantly feel invisible? Am I wrong for just wanting acknowledgement that my life's path, while different, is just as valid? I can't help but feel like an outsider in my own family, and that maybe stepping back is what I really need right now. But the guilt lingers, especially given my mother's emotional appeals. So, am I the asshole for telling my family I'm perfectly fine not speaking to them? Is it so wrong to want to be seen and appreciated for who I am and not who I'm expected to be? My feelings are conflicted, and I don't know where to turn. Am I expecting too much from them? Or am I justified in my concern? This is where I am now, unsure and heart-aching. AITA for enforcing a strict no pets on the furniture rule, even though it caused a huge rift in my friend group. I've always been very close with my friend group, a tight-knit circle of 6 of us, myself, Alex, Beth, Danny, Emma, and Jake. Every Friday, one of us hosts a get-together at their house, and it's been an unspoken tradition for almost 5 years. We've celebrated birthdays, promotions, and all sorts of milestones together. Everyone looks forward to these weekly gatherings, including me, until recently when I decided to implement a new rule at my place: no pets on the furniture. The whole issue began last month when my grandmother passed away, and she left me her vintage living room set. This furniture is a beautiful, intricate set from the 1940s, and it holds significant sentimental value as I remember spending many childhood afternoons lounging and listening to her stories. I want to keep everything as pristine as possible and maintain the lovely environment I've set up in my home. Besides, I also have mild allergies, which further encourage my decision to keep pets off these particular pieces. When I informed my friends about this new rule, I was careful to explain my reasons. Everyone seemed to understand and comply, except for Jake. Jake has a large, exuberant golden retriever named Charlie, who is cherished by all of us. Charlie's affectionate and well-behaved, but he does have a tendency to jump on furniture, especially if he gets excited. Whenever Jake brings him along, Charlie is like another companion, and most of us adore his company. My furniture, however, won't survive the love of a large, excited dog. The first week I implemented the rule, everyone took in stride. Jake, though he seemed a bit put off, kept Charlie by his side on the floor. However, by the second week, the tension was noticeable. Jake started making comments like, "The furniture snob demands non-canine company," and chuckling as if it were a joke. True, he didn't let Charlie up on the couches, but the underlying annoyance in Jake's demeanor made gatherings awkward. After some conspicuous grumbling and passive-aggressive remarks, Jake outright refused to come over for the third gathering unless Charlie was allowed on the furniture. The others discussed how they should spend less time at my place on account of the unwelcoming atmosphere. Consequently, our group decided to meet at Beth's that week. I joined the gathering, albeit reluctantly, as I felt disappointed about the lack of support for respecting my home. The discussions continued during the party, and the atmosphere was awkward. Beth, trying to mediate, said she understood both sides but remarked that it was challenging for Jake since dogs are like family. Danny piped in, agreeing and adding his own take on how pets should be treated as equal beings. I countered, explaining again about the heirloom furniture's personal significance and my mild allergies, but these points seemed to fall flat in the wake of emotional appeals about pet inclusivity. Things took a more intense turn last Friday. Emotions were already running high, and when it was my turn to host again, Jake simply texted, "Not happening unless I can come without restrictions." I reiterated my stance and told him it was unfortunate he felt that way. It was then that I realized how alienated I felt from my group, like I was some villainous homeowner with an aversion to comfort for the sake of my own property. Emma texted me privately later, suggesting I consider allowing a compromise, like covering the chair with a blanket so Charlie could relax. I felt patronized, as though my effort to preserve a family memory was trivialized. This has gone on for weeks. It's heartbreaking because I care for my friends deeply, but they seem to perceive me as a buzzkill. There's a clear divide growing in the group, with Jake subtly egging them on against my rigid rules, while I stand my ground, mindful of both allergies and sentimental value. It's reached a point where I'm no longer looking forward to Fridays, and our friendships feel strained, not to mention the ongoing pressure to host gatherings is battering my resolve. I'm at a crossroads. My furniture might seem like just things to them, but to me, they represent cherished memories and family heritage. At the same time, I'm aware that relationships involve compromise, yet I'm reluctant to let this particular boundary be overstepped. I've come to a point where I even wonder if I'm letting an emotional attachment to furniture ruin friendships. But I can't help feeling dismissed in my own home for a rule that does not seem unreasonable from my perspective. So, am I the asshole for enforcing a no pets on the furniture rule when it has clearly stirred tension and resentment among my friend group? Should I reconsider my stand and find a middle ground, or stay firm in preserving what little I have left of my grandmother's legacy? AITA for refusing to compose music for my sister's film despite having the time and skills? To give you the full context, let me start with a little background about myself and my family. My name is Lucas. I'm 29 years old, and I work as a freelance music composer. Music has always been my passion, and I've been fortunate to turn it into a career. My compositions range from scores for independent films to providing background music for commercials and online content. My sister, Emily, is 26 and a budding filmmaker. She's always been creative, a natural storyteller. We grew up close, sharing similar interests in the arts and often supporting each other's projects. She's directed a few short films, mostly self-funded, and I've notoriously been her go-to for anything music-related, helping her out whenever I could, often free of charge. Around 8 months ago, Emily approached me with the most ambitious project she's attempted so far, a feature-length film. She showed me the script she had been relentlessly working on, and I must say, I was impressed with her dedication and creativity. As usual, she asked if I'd be interested in composing the score for this film. At that time, my schedule was packed, dealing with multiple clients and tight deadlines. So, I told her that I was fully booked and couldn't help her this time. She was disappointed, but she understood and said she'd figure something out. Fast forward to now. Emily's film is nearly finished. She found a temporary musician to provide a placeholder score, hoping to replace it with a professionally composed piece once she had more resources. Through sheer luck and immense effort, she recently secured a small grant specifically allocated for post-production, and her eyes were once again set on me to compose the music. My own workload has lessened a bit lately, and financially, I'm doing okay, not feeling pressure to take every project that comes my way right now. Here's where things get tricky. Over these months, I've started to notice a pattern. My assistance for Emily has been taken for granted rather than appreciated. In past projects, the timelines I set got ignored because the project just needed a little more time. She'd make last-minute changes to the film that required reworking entire compositions, all while acting as if my time was dispensable because, after all, I'm only her brother. When she came to me again this time, offering to pay me with part of her grant money, it felt more like a token gesture than a professional collaboration. Moreover, Emily tends to have a vision that she strictly adheres to. Any creative suggestions or deviations I bring to the table often get bluntly rejected. So, honestly, it feels more like ghost composing for her rather than a stimulating creative opportunity. Yet again, when I told her I wasn't interested, explaining I wished to focus on my compositions and projects where the creative process was seizing and rewarding, she reacted poorly. Emily accused me of holding a grudge for having been too busy months ago and ignoring her plight now just for my personal gain, considering I have fewer projects at the moment. When she presented this to our family, though, that's where the real fallout happened. My parents accused me of being selfish and using my skills only for money rather than investing in family. According to them, this film is a family legacy, and my refusal is essentially an abandonment. They have this idealistic view where families work together for mutual success, not considering the essence of a mutually respectful professional relationship. My family sees Emily's film as an artistic contribution to our family story, and my refusal to partake as an act of distancing myself from them altogether. Things escalated when Emily vented about it in a long post on Facebook. She painted me as a callous sibling who could care less about family and more about the corporate dollar. While that may have garnered sympathy from some family friends, it made me question if I'm truly the only one being rationally professional here. From the outside looking in, I might just seem like a brother more concerned about his job than his sister's dream. But internally, I feel my choices are being dictated by unfair expectations and guilt trips. I sat down to write this because I'm genuinely torn. I know the emotional support and brotherly love are significant. But does that mean setting aside my own preferences and values to please family? This isn't about money for me. It's about respect and enthusiasm for the work I do. Yet, my family makes me feel as though this is a betrayal, simply because I'm choosing not to marry personal and professional lines in a way that I believe is unfairly skewed. AITA for standing my ground and refusing to work on Emily's film under these circumstances? Am I neglecting my familial duties and making this situation harder on Emily than it needs to be? I can't help wondering if I'm being too rigid because of past resentments, or if this is a necessary stance to maintain my own principles and professional dignity. AITA for throwing an unintentional dating intervention for my best friend? I'm in my late 30s, and I've been best friends with Tom since college. We've been through thick and thin together, and I can always count on him to be there when I need him. We've had our ups and downs like any friendship, but we've managed to stay close despite living in different cities now. Tom is a successful graphic designer, and he's pretty dedicated to his craft. He has been single for a while, and as his best friend, I always felt like he just hadn't met the right person yet. Recently, Tom's dating life has become somewhat of a spectacle among our friend group. He's become known for having inconsistent, often amusing dating experiences. Stuff like going on 5 dates with different people in a single week and getting ghosted by every one of them. While he often laughs it off, some of his stories have raised a few red flags for me. Each time I asked him if he was okay or wanted to talk about it, he just brushed it off, saying he's just having fun. Last month, I was chatting with Sarah, a mutual friend, who expressed her concern about Tom. She suggested that maybe we should all hang out together and subtly bring up the topic to see how he's really feeling. We both agreed that it had to be casual and non-confrontational. I ran the idea by a few other friends from the group, and they all seemed to think it was worth a shot, so we planned a casual dinner at my place. On the night of the dinner, Tom showed up in his usual jovial mood, and we all had a great time eating, drinking, and catching up. As planned, we gradually and organically steered the conversation toward relationships. Sarah started by asking Tom how his dating life was going in that playful, teasing way friends do. He launched into a funny story about his recent dates, laughing and making jokes at his own expense. But as the conversation unfolded, Tom seemed to grow a bit uncomfortable. It wasn't long before Ben, another friend of ours, brought up a more direct question. Tom, do you ever feel like maybe you need a little break from all this chaos? Tom shrugged it off at first, but then the room went silent for a moment, and he sighed. He admitted that, while the dating stories were, indeed, pretty funny, it was starting to feel more exhausting than entertaining. At this point, Sarah chimed in to share a similar experience she had been through a few years back, and that seemed to open the floodgates. Tom started to open up about how he felt pressured to keep putting himself out there because he didn't want to be alone or be seen as failing at dating. It turned into a really heartfelt conversation spanning a couple of hours, with everyone sharing their own experiences and feelings about love, loneliness, and expectations. Tom thanked us for the support, and it felt as though we had turned a corner. However, a few days later, Tom called me and said he felt ambushed. He understood that we were coming from a place of love, but he was frustrated that we had essentially arranged what he called a dating intervention without asking him. He was particularly upset with me for not just talking to him one-on-one if I was worried. I told him that the intention was never to make him feel ambushed or ganged up on. We genuinely thought it would be less pressure to have a group discussion with friends who care about him. I did apologize if it felt like we had crossed a line, and he said he appreciated the apology but was still feeling a bit miffed. Since then, things have been slightly awkward between us, and our conversations are just not the same. My friends and I have been discussing whether or not this was the right approach. Some believe we shouldn't have meddled at all, while others maintain that it was a caring gesture that just got misconstrued. I'm torn because my intention was to help, not to hurt or embarrass him. So, AITA for trying to support my friend with what ended up being an unintentional intervention. How do you balance being a good friend and respecting someone's privacy when you can see they're in a loop that might not be healthy for them? AITA for refusing to share my inheritance with my family. Hey Reddit, I need some perspective on a situation that's been causing serious friction within my family. I'm 28, about 5 years into my career and without a partner right now, but that's another story. My parents both have decent jobs, and we've always been a middle-class family in a moderately expensive city. The background: my grandfather on my mom's side passed away about 6 months ago. He was a bit of an eccentric gentleman who made some shrewd business investments. He lived a modest life, so the extent of his wealth was a surprise to all of us. When his attorney read the will, we discovered that Grandpa had left the bulk of his savings, about $500,000, solely to me. His reasoning, according to the letter he included, was that he believed in me and wanted me to have a secure future. My mom, dad, and 2 younger sisters were left general keepsakes and sentimental items, but no money. Now, here's where the drama starts. My family seemed supportive at first, emphasis on seemed. Over the months following the will's reading, things subtly shifted. I started getting hints about how the money could help out here and there. It started with small comments like how college funds for my sisters would be a little tight, how my dad needed a new car, or how a family trip would be a wonderful way to honor Grandpa's memory. To be clear, I was initially open to the idea of helping my family. It's in my nature and I love them dearly. But as the weeks went by, it became apparent that my family had an unwritten expectation that I would be sharing this inheritance. Their subtlety turned into outright suggestions about what they needed and what I could provide. I felt uneasy. I wanted to be wise about this sudden wealth, and my intention was to use a good portion of the money to invest in my future, buying a property, starting a business, or even going back to school for a master's degree. I kept discussing the plans with my financial advisor, trying to make smart choices. During a family dinner, out of the blue, my dad laid out a plan on the table about how the money could be split evenly to solve everyone's problems. The conversation pivoted to a discussion about family helping family and guilt about hoarding wealth amongst loved ones. I felt cornered and, admittedly, hurt that it had come to this. I raised my voice a little, saying that it was Grandpa's decision to leave me the money and that I had responsibilities to my future as well. Unfortunately, the conversation ended in an argument with a lot of angry words and statements thrown around, some I didn't care to hear, like not being a team player or turning my back on family. Since then, the tension has been palpable. I've tried to reach out and mend a relationship, but what's clear is that they're only open to discussions about generosity and sharing, as my mom puts it. My sisters, who are 18 and 20, are quieter about it, but I can tell they're swayed by our parents' opinions. My mom went so far as to say that Grandpa would have wanted us to be together as a family, not torn apart by money, which has only increased my guilt. There's no doubt in my mind that family is important, and I'm not against helping out. I've paid for a few things here and there, and I've even put some funds toward my sister's educational initiatives. But it's never enough, and now I feel emotionally blackmailed. I miss the genuine family bonding we had before the money. Yet, I also feel like I have to respect Grandpa's wishes and be responsible in honoring his confidence in me. Am I the asshole for holding on to my grandfather's inheritance despite my family's ongoing requests and diminishing relationship? Part of me thinks I'm justified in focusing on my future with this unexpected gift, but the ongoing strain certainly makes me question my decisions. I'd love to hear your perspective. AITA for refusing to lend my friend a significant amount of money after they helped me during a tough time. To give you some context, I, 33M, have been friends with Alex, 33M, since we were in high school, so it's been about 15 years now. We've been through a lot together, college roommates, first jobs, bad breakups, and everything else that comes with growing up. I consider him more like a brother than just a friend, and our families even know each other well. About 3 years ago, I hit a rough patch. I had been working for a tech startup and invested heavily in company stocks, only for the business to go under, wiping out nearly all my savings. Around the same time, my dad got sick, and I was commuting back and forth between cities to look after him. Bills were piling up, and I was stressed beyond belief. Alex, being the generous soul he is, noticed my predicament and offered to help. He lent me about $10,000 to cover my living expenses and some of my medical bills for my dad. He never pressured me for a repayment date, and the only thing he asked in return was that I help him out if he ever found himself in a similar bind. I agreed, feeling eternally grateful. Fast forward to now, my finances have stabilized significantly. I found employment with a reputable company, climbed the ranks quickly, and have a solid financial safety net. My dad is doing a lot better now, and things in my personal life are back on an even keel. I've already paid Alex back the money he lent me, with interest, as a token of my appreciation for his support when I needed it most. About 2 months ago, Alex dropped a bombshell on our friend group. He decided to quit his steady job to pursue his passion as a freelance graphic designer. While I admired his courage, I couldn't help but feel it was a risky move since he didn't have any substantial clients lined up at the time. I expressed my concerns, but he seemed confident and brushed off any worries. His savings ran dry quicker than he anticipated. He was struggling to maintain his lifestyle, pay rent, and manage other financial obligations. During a recent hangout, Alex pulled me aside and reminded me of our agreement. If he ever found himself in a tough spot, I'd help him out as he did for me. He asked me for a loan, this time around $30,000, to cover his expenses while he got his freelance business off the ground. Here's where the dilemma comes in. Although I sympathize with his situation, the amount is substantial. We're talking $30,000 during a time when the economy isn't particularly favorable for freelance creatives, especially those just starting. I try to bring this up gently, suggesting he might want to consider getting a part-time job as he builds his client base, but he was adamant that he needed to focus entirely on his new venture. I also have my own concerns to think about. I'm engaged to be married, saving for a house, and supporting my younger sister through college. My financial responsibilities are significant, and while I'm not strapped for cash, $30,000 isn't just money I can comfortably part with, not without some assurance it won't impact my goals and plans. I explained my perspective to Alex, hoping he'd understand. Instead, he seemed hurt and betrayed, asking how I could prioritize my stability over our long-standing friendship, especially after he helped me out when I was in need. Our conversation ended on a tense note, and our friend group is somewhat divided over the issue. Some understand my position, but others believe I should honor the verbal agreement we made years ago. In the days following our conversation, Alex became somewhat distant. He's declined a few invites to events he would never usually miss and has been less communicative. While I still consider him a dear friend, this tension is becoming increasingly uncomfortable. There's another layer, though. During one of our group gatherings, another friend mentioned a story about Alex asking someone else for a loan for a different, less pressing reason about a year ago. This contradicts the narrative Alex has been presenting, where he seems like he's in dire need for the first time since making his career change. I'm torn between different emotional pulls. Part of me feels guilty for not readily helping out the friend who once did the same for me, even though the circumstances differ. Another part of me worries that granting him this loan would enable risky behavior, potentially causing more harm than good. And then there's the concern about my own financial health and priorities, which everyone keeps saying should come first. Our mutual friends are split. Some think Alex is asking too much, particularly given the financial climate and the amount requested. Others argue that it's only fair to reciprocate the help since Alex once did it for me. The divide is stressing our friend group dynamic, which was always our safe space. Now I'm stuck questioning myself. Am I the asshole for not lending my friend the money? Or am I doing the right thing by prioritizing my financial stability and future plans? I never intended to place monetary concerns above our friendship, but the tangled web of money and personal ties can often blur the lines. I don't want to lose Alex's friendship, yet I can't ignore the red flags that are popping up about his decision-making. Am I truly the bad guy in this situation? AITA for refusing to help my brother move out after an argument over a potentially lucrative business opportunity? All right, Internet. I need to know if I'm a complete jerk here. Last weekend was an absolute disaster, and I'm not sure if I'm the one to blame. Let me set the scene. My brother, Eric, and I have always had a typical sibling relationship. Occasional fights followed by making up, and then everything is fine. He's 2 years older than me, and we've both been somewhat successful in our careers, though in very different industries. I'm in software development, while Eric is into real estate. We both live in the same city, but I have my own place, and he was living with his girlfriend, Michelle. Now, a bit about Eric. He's always had this entrepreneurial spirit. Ever since we were kids, he's had his eyes set on owning things, be it a collection of Pokemon cards or later, houses. About 6 months ago, he got this idea for a new business, turning old vans into mobile homes. He was inspired by the whole van life movement and figured there was a market for customization. I'll admit, the idea seemed intriguing, especially given how popular and Instagram-worthy van life has become. Eric approached me with a pitch, a joint venture between us. He wanted me to develop a dedicated app for his business so potential clients could design their dream vans online. It would allow users to customize the interior layout, features, and aesthetics with the expected costs updating live. It sounded complicated but exciting, and I could feel that tech itch, the desire to flex my skills and build something new. However, Eric's proposal had one major hitch. He wanted me to do this app as an initial free investment, with profit shares promised based on future revenue. He saw it as a partnership, but I was wary. I've had enough experience with projects that seemed promising but never took off. Plus, developing something as sophisticated as he wanted would take significant time that would take away from paying projects. So, I hesitated. I asked for more concrete numbers, projections, something that could help me justify the hours I'd spend on it. Eric, unfortunately, didn't have any figures or a business plan, just his passion and persuasive enthusiasm. He was all about the we'll figure it out as we go mentality, and while I admired his spirit, it wasn't enough for me. Fast forward to last Friday. Eric, Michelle, my girlfriend Jenna, and I were having dinner at my place. The dinner conversation inevitably turned to Eric's business idea again. I tried to bring up my concerns and pleaded for more groundwork before I committed. Eric took my hesitation as a personal affront. He accused me, loudly, of not supporting him and lacking faith in what he believed could be our chance to make it big. The argument spiraled quickly. Eric got angrier and started picking on nitpicky details from our past, times when I hadn't helped him move because I was in college finals week, or when I couldn't lend him money for something because I was barely making ends meet at my first job. Jenna tried to mediate, but it was hopeless. It ended with Eric storming out, with Michelle reluctantly trailing behind him, clearly embarrassed. The next day, Eric texted me, somewhat apologetic, explaining that they were kicked out of their apartment. Apparently, the landlord needed the unit for personal use, which he suspected was a lie, and he had a small window to vacate. Then, he asked if I could help him move that day. Still smarting from a yelling match the night before, I told him I couldn't make it. I was scheduled to work on some freelance projects that weekend, deadlines looming over my head. More than that, I was still hurt. I said I hoped the move would go smoothly and left it at that. Later, I found out through our family that Eric did manage the move, but with great difficulty. Almost all of our mutual friends were out of town or busy, and he ended up doing most of it with just Michelle. My parents are furious with me, saying I should have swallowed my pride and helped my brother in his time of need, regardless of our spat. Jenna is supportive, saying it's understandable that I needed some space after the blow-up. At the same time, she wonders if I could have been the bigger person. I don't want to let my brother down. Despite our disagreements, we've always had each other's backs. I'm torn. Should I have set aside my feelings and been there for Eric despite everything? Was I too cold-hearted to refuse help over an argument? AITA for not wanting to get involved in his business or for not helping him move when he needed me the most? AITA for refusing to babysit my sister's kids for free? I'm a 29-year-old single guy with a full-time job and, until recently, a pretty uncomplicated life. I enjoy my weekends and after-work hours, usually spending them with friends or pursuing my hobbies. But things have gotten more complex, and now I'm facing a morally challenging situation with my sister, Emily. Emily is 32 and has 3 kids under the age of 8. She's a stay-at-home mom by choice, as her husband, Mike, earns reasonably well. Our relationship has always been a mixed bag. We often butt heads because she assumes a more authoritative role, likely because she's older or perhaps just her personality. I've always been the cool uncle, the one who shows up with gifts, plays video games with the kids, or sneaks in sweets when they're not supposed to have them. A few months ago, Emily approached me with a proposal. She had taken up a part-time online course and needed someone to watch the kids while she attended her classes. She assured me it wouldn't interfere with my work. It would be evenings and some weekends. At first, I was on board. I love my nieces and nephews, and spending time with them sounded fun. She mentioned that due to their financial planning, to accommodate her education, they'd appreciate it if I could help out for free. She played the family card hard. After all, isn't this what family does? She said. Initially, it wasn't too bad. Kids are a handful, but I managed. It was light work. We played games, did homework, made some basic meals. But soon things began spiraling. Emily's requests increased. She started asking me to watch the kids more than twice a week. She'd often extend her class duration with errands or study group meetings as excuses. Imagine my surprise, though perhaps not quite disbelief, when I found out these groups were more about coffee chats than academics. Where Emily thought I didn't notice, Mike seemed completely oblivious to the entire arrangement. He works late and travels often, so I rarely saw him. I wanted to bring it up with him one Saturday when he was home, but the perfect moment never presented itself. Plus, Emily had made it clear Mike wasn't thrilled about her even going back to school. As weeks went by, my other responsibilities got neglected. I barely saw my friends and felt constantly exhausted at work. Eventually, everything bubbled over at a Friday work dinner, which I had nearly missed because I was stuck at my sister's duo. My close friend, Jake, pieced together my frustration over beers and called me out. "Why aren't you asking for something in return? Time's precious." His words stayed with me. So, I decided to have a direct conversation with Emily. I asked if she could maybe compensate me in some way. I wasn't asking for a lot, perhaps covering my gas or offering small tokens of appreciation. Since it consumed my evenings and weekends, a token acknowledgement seemed fair. Emily, however, flipped. She accused me of being greedy and unsupportive, insisting that I was putting money before family. I was taken aback by her reaction. I tried explaining that it wasn't about money. It was about appreciation and balance. She wouldn't hear it. "I believed you were a good uncle, more family than anyone. Mike and I have always counted on your support, haven't we? I can't believe you're doing this now," she said. I felt awful, like I'd somehow betrayed the essence of family, or at least what Emily believed family should be. After discussing it with a few folks, opinions were divided. My parents, while understanding my perspective, hinted that maybe Emily felt the pressure of catching up academically with an already heavy lifestyle. They suggested Emily hadn't necessarily communicated this stress to me effectively. I tried revisiting the matter with Emily, aiming for a compromise, perhaps reducing the babysitting or setting a structured schedule. But she remained unyielding, using every interaction to guilt me into reconsidering. Her favorite line became, "If you really cared about the kids, money wouldn't matter." It's been a few weeks since we last spoke about it. I've chosen to step back and let things cool, but the absence is palpable, and the kids surely notice. I miss them. Still, it's been refreshing to reclaim some personal time. Meanwhile, Emily has found alternative sitters, though she's often quick to mention they aren't like family. Yet, the guilt lingers. I wonder if I'm being selfish or missing a bigger picture. Reddit, help me out here. Am I really the asshole for refusing to continue babysitting for free? Or is it fair to have set those boundaries? Hey friends, if you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what could be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. AITA for refusing to babysit my sister-in-law's kids, which has caused a major family feud. To give you some background, I, 29M, live in a small city in the Midwest with my wife, Jenny, 28F. We've been happily married for 5 years and are expecting our first child in a few months. We both have stable jobs. I'm a software developer while Jenny works as a graphic designer. Family has always been important to us, but we never anticipated that it would come with such tension and drama. My brother, Mark, 35M, is married to Sarah, 32F. They have 3 kids, all under the age of 7. Mark and Sarah live about a 20-minute drive from our place, and for the longest time, we all got along well. We had family barbecues, holiday dinners, and the occasional weekend hangout. Things were good, and we all enjoyed each other's company. But earlier this year, Jenny and I started noticing that Sarah would frequently call us to ask if we could take care of their kids, often on short notice. At first, we were happy to help. Jenny and I are happy to spend time with the kids, especially since we know that being parents and keeping up with work can be challenging. However, the requests from Sarah began to grow more frequent. Once, twice, and then several times a week. It started feeling less like an occasional babysitting favor and more like we were becoming an unofficial daycare center. Sarah, for some reason, seems to view our lack of kids as a license to make us their de facto babysitters. Her rationale is that we would want practice before a baby arrives, so what better way than to take care of her little ones? While I appreciate the sentiment, Jenny and I also value our time. We want to spend as much time as possible enjoying each other's company before our bundle of joy arrives. It all came to a head one Saturday morning when Sarah called us around 7 a.m., desperately asking if we could babysit for the day. Jenny and I already had plans for a baby moon weekend at a cozy B&B about 2 hours drive away. I told Sarah that we couldn't help this time and explained our plans. The phone went silent for a few seconds, and then she responded with, "You two are so selfish. You have the luxury of spontaneity, and yet you can't help out for a single day. These are your nieces and nephews." I calmly reiterated our plans and apologized, but said that we had to go. She hung up in a huff. Initially, we shrugged it off and went on with our plans, but when we returned on Sunday, my phone was flooded with messages from both Mark and our parents. Sarah had called them and spun a story that painted us as abandoning family duties for a leisurely weekend getaway. Mark was particularly annoyed, claiming that family should always come first. My parents, who have always been about keeping the peace, suggested we have everyone over for dinner to discuss the situation. The dinner, however, quickly turned into a disaster. As soon as Sarah and Mark arrived, the accusations started flying. Sarah felt that we were being dismissive of their parental struggles, and Mark challenged me, saying, "How will you manage when you have your own kid if you can't handle watching ours for a day?" I stayed calm and told them that while we love spending time with their kids, it felt like an expectation rather than a request. I further explained that this was stressing out Jenny, who is pregnant and needs to relax. This is when Sarah uttered something that really hurt Jenny. "If Jenny can't handle this, good luck with an actual child." That was it. Jenny went quiet, and we decided it was time for them to leave. My parents sat there shocked and didn't say much, probably hoping it would blow over. Since then, things have been tense. Mark and Sarah have essentially blocked us out, which has caused strain between Mark and me. Family gatherings are now awkward and filled with undercurrents of resentment. Even though Jenny and I stand our ground, I can't help but question myself. Was I too harsh? Should I have just put our plans on pause to help them? I keep replaying these questions in my mind, thinking about different ways we could have maneuvered the situation. Jenny tries her best to put up a strong front, but I can tell the whole ordeal upsets her. She's hurt by Sarah's words and feels anxious about the next family gathering. My parents have suggested letting it blow over, but they fail to see the underpinning issues of respect and boundary setting that need addressing. I don't want this to permanently damage our family relationships, but I also don't want to set a precedent that allows disrespect and disregard for our personal lives and boundaries. I find myself at a crossroads, unsure of what the next steps should be. I still love my family and want to maintain harmony, but not at the cost of sacrificing my own family's needs. So, Reddit, am I the asshole for refusing to continually babysit my sister-in-law's kids and standing up for the boundaries Jenny and I have set? Should I be the one to mend things first for the sake of family peace? Your input would be greatly appreciated. AITA for enforcing a strict no-phone policy at a family gathering. I'm a 45-year-old father of two teenagers, Emma, 16, and Jake, 14, and I recently hosted a family gathering that turned into quite the ordeal. A bit of background. My wife, Cheryl, and I both work hectic jobs, so we try to enforce a few rules that help us reconnect with our kids and family. One of these is the no-phone policy during family meals and gatherings, which we've practiced at home for years and typically extend to when we have guests over. About 2 weeks ago, Cheryl and I hosted a family reunion at our house for the first time since the pandemic began. It was a pretty big deal for us, as we hadn't seen many of our extended family members in a long time. We were thrilled to welcome over 20 relatives, including Cheryl's sister, Linda, her husband, Dan, and their two kids, Andy, 17, and Lily, 15. They live a few states away, and we only see them once or twice a year. In the invite, we politely mentioned our no-phone policy during meals, hoping everyone would understand that we just wanted to focus on face-to-face interactions. Most of our family seemed agreeable, and I figured everything would go smoothly. The first evening of the reunion, everything went as planned until dinner. As everyone settled down, I reminded them to put their phones away. That's when Linda and Dan exchanged a look with their kids. Andy and Lily hesitated, and Linda said, "Oh, come on, it's not a big deal if they just use their phones a little." I calmly reiterated that the policy wasn't about controlling anyone, but rather about making the most of family time. Cheryl supported me, emphasizing how rare these gatherings were. Linda sighed and whispered something to Lily, who reluctantly put her phone away. Andy grudgingly followed suit. The first evening passed without further incident, but the second day, things escalated. We organized a barbecue in our backyard, and after eating, I noticed a group of the younger kids had congregated, each glued to their phone screens. Among them were Andy, Lily, Emma, and Jake. I approached Jake first and asked him to set an example by putting his phone away. He did so with minimal fuss. When I asked the others to do the same, Andy rolled his eyes and said, "Your house, your rules, I guess, but not in a respectful tone." I try not to let it bother me, thinking it was just teenage attitude. However, as the evening went on, Andy and Lily repeatedly sneaked their phones out, giggling over something they were sharing. Each time I caught them, I asked them to put the phones away again. Later that night, Linda confronted me, visibly upset. She accused me of being too strict and said that Andy and Lily felt singled out. She argued that teenagers are used to being connected and that my rules were outdated. I tried to explain my intentions again, but she cut me off, saying I was ruining what was supposed to be a fun time for her kids. Cheryl stepped in and mentioned how she appreciated my efforts to keep family time sacred. Linda rolled her eyes and asked why we couldn't just relax and let the kids have their fun. Tensions rose, and we ended the night on an awkward note. The final day of the reunion was supposed to be a brunch followed by a farewell gathering. Most of the family seemed to enjoy themselves, but Linda, Dan, and their kids were clearly distant. After they left, I got a few text messages from family members who had attended the reunion. Some echoed Linda's sentiment, suggesting I had been too stringent, while others appreciated the phone-free focus. Emma and Jake had their opinions, too. Emma thought I could have been a bit more lenient with her cousins, mentioning that they seemed uncomfortable without their phones. Jake, on the other hand, appreciated the rare chance to engage in actual conversations and wished it happened more often. Reflecting on the situation, I'm torn. Part of me feels that I could have approached the situation differently, maybe setting designated phone-free times instead of enforcing a blanket policy. But another part of me believes that family gatherings should prioritize direct interactions, especially when they're so rare. I've always felt that the world is increasingly losing touch with the importance of face-to-face communication, especially among younger generations. Balancing the digital and real worlds is tough, and perhaps I pushed too hard in trying to tip the scales. Now, weeks later, there's still some awkwardness between Cheryl, me and Linda's family. I wonder if they'll think twice before joining another of our gatherings. Cheryl stands by my actions, but I can't shake the nagging feeling that I could have handled the situation with a bit more diplomacy. So, AITA for sticking to my guns on the no-phone policy at the family gathering, or should I have adapted to accommodate everyone's digital habits? AITA for refusing to let my sister use my cabin for her silent retreat because it's not fully equipped the way she wants? So here's the scoop. I, 34M, have a small cabin in the woods that I've been gradually fixing up over the past few years. It's my personal getaway spot where I recharge and escape the hustle and bustle of daily life. The cabin is nestled in a serene setting, surrounded by tall pines and a picturesque lake. It's quite basic, think rustic charm without modern luxuries, but suits me just fine. My younger sister, Claire, 28F, decided to take a year off work to focus on her mental health and well-being. Claire has always been more in touch with her spiritual side, often hopping from one wellness retreat to another. Recently, she informed the family that she intended to embark on a silent retreat, a month-long period where she cut off all communication with the outside world to meditate and reconnect with her inner self. Naturally, our family supported her decision, and I was genuinely happy to see her prioritize her mental health. However, things took a turn when Claire called me and mentioned she wanted to use my cabin for her retreat. She described it as the perfect spot for isolation and self-reflection. Now, I don't have an issue with her using it. She's my sister, after all. But there was a condition. She wanted certain modifications made to make her stay more comfortable. In her words, the cabin needed some essential upgrades. A new heating system for the colder nights, a modern composting toilet instead of the old outhouse, Wi-Fi for emergencies, which I felt kind of contradicted the idea of disconnecting, and a delivery of organic groceries every week. She planned to set up a solar panel system as well, as she considered electricity an acceptable luxury. When I voiced concerns about the practicality and the costs involved, Claire offered to help fund the additions. However, she wanted me to oversee the renovations to ensure everything was completed before her retreat date. This was where I drew the line. You see, the cabin is my escape, and its simplicity is what makes it special to me. The moment it morphs into a quasi-modern home, it loses that tranquil charm. I told Claire that she's welcome to use it as it is, but I wasn't comfortable making those upgrades, even if she was willing to cover some of the expenses. I offered to help her find an alternative location that fits her requirements for the retreat. Yet, she reacted with frustration, calling me unsupportive. She accused me of prioritizing my convenience over her mental health journey, which left me feeling torn. Our parents are sympathetic to her plight and have gently suggested that a few improvements wouldn't hurt. They argued that Wi-Fi and a new toilet aren't too much to ask for someone who plans to spend a month there alone. My dad even offered to help with the renovations, but the idea of my peaceful retreat turning into a construction zone stresses me out. Since then, things have been awkward between Claire and me. She's vented to mutual friends, some of whom think I'm being overly rigid. They say a good brother wouldn't let something as trivial as a rustic getaway impede his sister's wellness. Others, though, agree that she can find a more equipped place elsewhere. There's another layer to this. I feel guilty because Claire has always been there for me during my rough patches, offering a listening ear and support whenever I needed it. Yet, this isn't just about the cabin. It's about compromising a personal space that holds profound sentimental value to me. I don't know if any of you have experienced something similar. While I do want to support Claire, I can't shake off the gut feeling that sacrificing the sanctuary I've built for her specifications is crossing a boundary I'm not comfortable with. Claire isn't the type to hold grudges, but I know she's disappointed, and I hate being the cause of that. So, Reddit, AITA for denying my sister's request to modify my cabin for her retreat, or am I right in protecting the integrity of my special place? AITA for telling my best friend I don't like his girlfriend and refusing to hang out with him? I've been best friends with Jake for over a decade, since we were freshmen in high school. We've been through everything together: college, breakups, our first real jobs, and even moved to the same city after graduation. He's the closest thing I have to a brother, and I care about him immensely. But lately, things have gotten awkward between us, and I feel like I might be the one at fault. Here's the situation. Jake started dating Rachel about a year ago. Initially, I was thrilled for him because from what he described, she sounded perfect. He's dated some pretty questionable people in the past, and Rachel was a refreshing change. She's intelligent, has a good job, and seemed to genuinely care about him. But as I got to know her, I found myself not liking her as much as he did. The more I interacted with Rachel, the more I realized we were completely different people. And I mean completely. The first time I met Rachel was at a small dinner party Jake threw at his apartment. There were about 8 of us, including some mutual friends. The night started fairly well. Everyone was chatting and having a good time. But things took a turn when Rachel began insisting that her views on various topics were the only correct ones. She wasn't just sharing her thoughts. She was intolerant of anyone else's opinions. The dinner conversation turned tense when someone brought up a political issue, and Rachel began cutting people off, raising her voice, and dictating what was right and wrong. Even when someone tried to change the topic, she kept steering it back to her debates, as she called them. I've always believed in live and let live, so her attitude rubbed me the wrong way. I decided to give her the benefit of the doubt and thought maybe she just had a strong personality. But the second incident made me question that view. Jake and I had planned a hiking trip, something we do regularly and really enjoy. Rachel decided to join us, which was fine. The more, the merrier, I thought. But throughout the entire hike, she was either on her phone or complaining about the trail. She ignored Jake's attempts to engage her in the scenery or the activity itself. Once, when Jake paused to take some photos, he's an amateur photographer, Rachel audibly sighed and commented that she didn't see the point in wasting time on capturing a landscape when one could simply look up similar photos online. It seemed like she had little appreciation for Jake's interests, and I could see it deflated him a bit. The once simple act of hanging out with Jake and having fun turned into a delicate dance around Rachel's moods and opinions. The breaking point for me arrived at a mutual friend's birthday party about a month ago. Rachel and Jake arrived late, and immediately Rachel commandeered the party, directing what kind of music should play and organizing games despite it being clear that the host had already planned things out. What really got to me was when one of our friends, who wasn't feeling well, wanted to leave early, and Rachel made a snide comment about her being a party pooper, even though it was clear the friend was genuinely ill. Driving home that night, I couldn't shake off that feeling of discomfort. It made me realize how much I missed just hanging out with Jake without the added pressure of navigating Rachel's domineering personality. Over the next few weeks, I found myself dodging plans that involved the two of them. Jake would text asking if I wanted to hang out, and I'd make excuses if I knew Rachel would be there too. It was cowardly, I admit, but I was hoping to avoid any confrontation. But this avoidance didn't go unnoticed. Jake, being the observant guy he is, caught on to my behavior pretty quickly. Last weekend, he called me out, asking if something was wrong. Knowing I couldn't hide the truth forever, I decided to be honest with him. We met up at our favorite coffee shop, neutral ground, I suppose, where we've had countless heart-to-hearts before. I told him that while I thought Rachel was a great girlfriend to him, I personally found her difficult to be around. It was a hard conversation, and I made sure to explain that it had nothing to do with her relationship with him. I just felt that, individually, she and I clashed. Jake listened intently and seemed to appreciate my honesty. I tried to assure him that it didn't take away from my happiness for him and Rachel, but that I'd rather avoid hanging out as a group if possible. The following days have been painful. Jake needed some time to process, which I fully understand, but it's been radio silence from his end. Our usual daily banter has stalled, and I'm starting to regret opening my mouth. Part of me wonders if I overstepped, or if I should have just sucked it up for the sake of our friendship. But simultaneously, shouldn't friends be able to discuss things openly, even if they're uncomfortable? I genuinely didn't want to put him in an awkward position, nor do I want him to feel like he has to choose between me and Rachel. Which brings me to the whole point of this post. Am I the asshole for expressing my difficulty with my best friend's girlfriend, despite her being a crucial part of his life now? Is it unreasonable to draw a line when a friend's partner feels overbearing, or should I just gritted my teeth and dealt with it? AITA for refusing to change my lifestyle to accommodate my friend's newfound environmental consciousness. I've been grappling with mixed emotions ever since a recent disagreement with a group of friends over our differing approaches to environmental consciousness. We're a close-knit circle that's been together since college, and I've always been someone who likes to maintain their own lifestyle without really bending for trends. I never expected this to become a point of contention between us, but here we are. For context, I live in a small city apartment, and my lifestyle revolves around convenience. I order a lot of takeout because I work long hours and don't have much time or energy to cook. My car is old but reliable, and since I have to drive around for work, I'm not in any rush to replace it with something more fuel efficient just because it's the current in thing. I'm also a self-professed fan of shopping for clothes online, sometimes even from fast fashion retailers, simply because it suits my budget and my taste. Don't get me wrong, I do what I can within reason. I recycle religiously, I try to limit my water usage, and I turn off lights and appliances when they're not in use. Decluttering regularly is another habit of mine, and I donate clothes and other items rather than simply throwing them away. These have always seemed like reasonable measures within my limits, especially since I live alone and have no intention of dramatically altering my life for any reason that's not immediately necessary. A few months back, a couple of friends from our group attended a sustainability conference and came back fired up with ideas and motivations to change the world. They began making radical changes to their own lives, composting religiously, installing solar panels, biking to work, going zero waste, and even starting a community garden. They're extremely vocal about their newfound passion, constantly sharing articles on climate change and organizing virtual meetups to discuss how we can all improve our ecological footprints. Initially, I applauded their enthusiasm and even participated in some discussions, but it soon became clear they were expecting everyone in the group to adopt various environmental lifestyle changes, including me. It started with mild suggestions, but turned into more insistent demands for accountability during our monthly meetups. Each time we caught up, the conversation inevitably veered towards what each person was doing to save the planet. The breaking point came last week. We were having dinner at one of the more sustainably conscious homes among us, when the conversation turned once again to the environment. One friend started discussing her zero-waste efforts, detailing how she hadn't produced a single bag of trash in over a month. Impressive, I thought silently, but not something I have the bandwidth or inclination to match completely right now. The conversation quickly became a sort of interrogation where everyone had to share what they had done in the past month to lessen their environmental impact. When it was my turn, I mentioned my regular recycling and energy-saving methods. I'm more than aware there's room for improvement, but I'm doing what I can in a way that doesn't disrupt my life. To my dismay, my response was met with collective disappointment. One particularly outspoken friend proceeded to lecture me on the dangers of fast fashion, personal carbon footprints, and the moral obligation we all have to do better. I felt like I was on trial. Each point was dismissively countered with what more I should be doing, suggestions that included adopting a plant-based diet, selling my car, and even starting to sew my own clothes to reduce reliance on unsustainable retailers. I explained calmly that I appreciate and respect their enthusiasm for the environment, but that I was neither ready nor willing to overhaul my life to such an extent. I mentioned I was making strides in ways that were feasible for me, and I couldn't compromise on that just because they felt passionately about it. That's when the mood shifted. I was accused of selfishness and sticking my head in the sand because it was convenient. The dinner wrapped up awkwardly, and we haven't spoken as a group since. Now, a few friends have been sending passive-aggressive messages hinting at how everyone needs to pull their weight for the environment. I'm left feeling torn. Part of me wonders if I'm being unreasonable or stubborn and allowing my personal comforts to outweigh greater societal responsibilities. But another part of me believes that not everyone is at a place in life where they can or need to make drastic changes overnight, and that personal growth is something that varies from individual to individual. Do personal choices weigh my friendships against my autonomy? Am I the asshole for not wanting to follow in my friends' environmental footsteps and sticking to a lifestyle that works best for me. I'm eager to hear outside perspectives since I've yet to reach a satisfactory conclusion on my own. AITA for refusing to co-sign a loan for my younger brother's business despite my family's pressure. When I was growing up, my younger brother, Jason, was always the more charismatic of the two of us. He had this incredible way of talking himself into and out of anything. While I was more reserved, preferring books and quiet afternoons, Jason was the life of the party, always buzzing with the next big plan. Over the years, his charisma grew into ambition, which often led him to take risks that some might consider hasty or reckless. I'm in my late 30s now, have a stable job in IT, and live a comfortable life with my partner, Sarah. I've always been diligent about saving and making well-thought-out decisions. Jason, on the other hand, has hopped from one venture to another, each with varying degrees of success. While some might call him an entrepreneur, others, like our parents, would say he hasn't quite found his footing yet. Recently, Jason approached me with what he called the opportunity of a lifetime. He wanted to open a boutique coffee shop in our hometown. He had meticulously planned out everything: the location, the menu, the interior design. He even had a catchy name and a unique theme, a fusion of a cafe and a local art gallery. It sounded impressive, but there was a hitch. Jason needed a significant loan to get it off the ground, and the bank required a co-signer due to his unstable financial history. Jason pitched his plan to me in detail, emphasizing the potential profits. He was confident, persuasive, and, admittedly, the idea did have merit. However, I knew from past experiences that when Jason's plans didn't go as intended, the fallout could be disastrous. With him having defaulted on previous smaller loans, I was wary of tying my finances to his latest endeavor. When I told Jason that I couldn't co-sign the loan, his reaction was a mix of disbelief and disappointment. He argued that family should support each other, and that I was only focusing on his past failures without recognizing his growth and determination. Despite my reservations, a part of me felt guilty. After all, what are older siblings for if not to help their younger siblings when needed? The situation quickly escalated when my parents got involved. They called me, expressing their support for Jason and suggesting that I was being too hard on him. They said I was his best chance at getting the loan and realizing his dream. My mother, in particular, leaned heavily on the angle of family loyalty, saying that family should always have each other's backs. I tried to explain my concerns, but they dismissed them as me being overly cautious and pessimistic. Sarah has been my rock during this whole ordeal. She understands my hesitation and fears about jeopardizing our financial stability. We've worked hard to build our lives together, and the idea of putting that at risk for a coffee shop in a dwindling market didn't sit right with either of us. However, with increasing pressure, I started to question whether I was indeed being too hard-hearted and unsupportive. Meanwhile, Jason's calls and messages became increasingly frustrated, sometimes even guilt-tripping. He would remind me of the times he had my back when we were kids, or when he helped me out in college when I was going through a tough time socially. He'd end every conversation with a hopeful question: "Are you sure you won't reconsider?" I finally decided to talk to some close friends and colleagues. I explained the entire situation, seeking their outside perspective. The feedback I received was mixed. Some said that helping him could lead to unnecessary financial strain and possibly damage our relationship if things went south. Others felt that taking risks is part of life and that denying him this opportunity could hinder his potential for success. I suppose I was looking for validation to uplift my stance, but everyone seemed to have a different perspective, which only confused me further. Days turned into weeks, and the pressure didn't ease. Sitting through another family dinner felt like a trial. Every conversation pointedly avoided the elephant in the room, only for my father to eventually bring it up with a heavy sigh. He shared stories of past relatives who had gone above and beyond for family, painting them as heroes. It was clear that, in his eyes, I was falling short of the mark. In between these moments, Jason had miraculously found another potential investor. This investor was willing to contribute, but only if Jason could raise a portion of the funds himself. Once again circling back to the need for a co-signer. I felt I was at a crossroads, torn between the practical concerns for my financial future and the emotional pull of supporting my brother in his entrepreneurial dream. I've always believed that honesty and responsibility are the best policies, but in this case, sticking to those values might earn me the label of the unsupportive sibling. In another conversation with Jason, I tried to shift the perspective. I offered to help him in other ways, like managing marketing for his business or providing support in areas where my skills could be valuable without the financial risk. But Jason seemed fixated on the loan, as it was the crucial step in getting his business up and running. As the deadline for his loan application loomed, I found myself in a constant state of turmoil. The idea of swallowing my concerns and co-signing the loan flitted in and out of my mind. I dreaded any potential failure that could lead to straining the family ties even more, or worse, dragging Sarah and me into financial disarray. After much thought, I stuck to my decision not to co-sign the loan. Jason was crushed, and with him still processing his disappointment, our relationship felt strained. My parents reluctantly accepted my decision, though I could tell it didn't sit well with them. I know that Jason's entrepreneurial spirit will likely bounce back, and maybe one day he will find success and stability in his way. In the meantime, I wonder if my actions now will only sow resentment and regret. Perhaps, with more experience and financial backing from other ventures, he can make his dream a reality without needing to rely on family to shoulder the risk. But I keep questioning myself. Did I do the right thing? Or did I let my cautious nature and fear of financial risk dictate my inability to support my brother fully when he needed it most? So, Reddit, AITA for refusing to. AITA for telling my best friend that I don't want to be her personal therapist anymore. I've known Sarah since we were 5. We've been through everything together. School, breakups, family dramas, the works. We've been each other's rock in so many ways, which is why it was such a difficult decision for me to distance myself from her over the last few months. Here's the thing. Sarah has always had what some might call a bit of a chaotic life. She tends to jump from one dramatic scenario to another, often dragging me along for the emotional roller coaster. I cherished our friendship and was always happy to lend a supportive ear, but over the years, it became clear that Sarah never really took any steps to solve her problems. It was like listening to an endless loop of the same issues. A toxic boyfriend she'd break up with and reconcile in an endless cycle, a dead-end job she hated but never left, ongoing fights with family members she had no interest in resolving. Some months ago, Sarah went through a particularly rough patch involving a breakup with her boyfriend, Mark. She called me every day, needing to vent about how awful he was, how she never wanted to see him again, how this time was really and truly the last time. I listened, offered advice, and provided whatever comfort I could. But then, as always, they reconciled, and the whole thing started over. I could see where this was heading. I felt exhausted, emotionally drained by what felt like an unending loop. I realized that my own mental health was taking a hit. My patience was wearing thin, and all our conversations seemed to revolve around Sarah's problems. I wasn't sharing anything about my own life, nor was she asking. This is when I decided to step back a little. I told her we needed to have serious talk. We met at our usual coffee shop, and, as expected, the conversation immediately veered towards her life drama. I gently interjected and said, "Sarah, I love you like a sister, but I can't be your personal therapist anymore." The hurt in her eyes was tangible. She asked me what I meant, and I recounted the past few years, pointing out how I always seemed to be the person she unloaded her problems onto without taking any steps to change the situation. I suggested she consider seeing an actual therapist who could provide the professional help she might need. Sarah was taken aback and immediately became defensive. She told me that friends should be there for each other, and she would always be there for me. I tried to explain how our relationship felt one-sided lately, that she never really listened to what I was going through. Instead, I said, I need some space to focus on myself for a bit. She left the cafe in a huff, and we've hardly spoken since. I've heard from mutual friends that she feels betrayed, claiming I abandoned her at her lowest point. Some friends have expressed support, understanding that I needed to make decisions for my sanity. Others have hinted that I was too harsh, suggesting I should have given her more time or continued being supportive. In the weeks since, I've enjoyed the relative peace. I've been focusing more on my own life, nurturing hobbies, and just enjoying not being embroiled in constant drama. Yet, I can't shake off the guilt when I think of Sarah and our years of friendship. Some friends, including a few mutual ones, have approached me to talk about Sarah's feelings. They say she feels isolated and doesn't think many people truly understand her like I do. A close friend mentioned that Sarah referred to me as her anchor during tumultuous times and that my distancing has left her feeling adrift. Hearing that broke my heart a little. I certainly never intended to leave my friend feeling so alone. At the same time, I don't want to fall back into the same pattern of being her go-to for every crisis. I've been there, done that, and I can't do it anymore, as much for her sake as for my own. When I recently ran into Sarah at a small gathering, it was awkward. She was polite but distant. There was no outright hostility, but the warmth we used to share seemed to have evaporated. She looked happier in some ways, but still avoided deep conversations with me. I wanted to reach out and ask how she was truly doing, to let her know I still cared deeply, but I hesitated, not wanting to reopen old wounds or offer the wrong promise to her when I wasn't sure I could keep. Our mutual friends have urged me to make amends, saying maybe Sarah's taking my words to heart and trying to change. They insist she's been seeing a therapist lately, and perhaps it might be the step forward we both needed. But a niggling part of me is hesitant to dive back into that dynamic. Do I risk the peace I've found for the sake of what used to be a great friendship? Still, I wonder if in trying to protect my own mental wellness, I ended up failing a friend. Despite everything, I do miss her the way we used to be before everything got so complicated and emotionally charged. So, am I the asshole for prioritizing my own peace and refusing to be her emotional crutch anymore? Is it fair to hope for a friendship that holds equal space for both of us without the drama and baggage? AITA for refusing to let my cousin stay at my apartment after the chaos he caused last time he visited? To give you a bit of background, I'm a 32-year-old living in a modest but cozy apartment in the city. Over the years, I've prided myself on keeping my living space calm and organized. I work from home, which means my apartment is both my sanctuary and my office. This makes it incredibly important for me to maintain an environment that's conducive to both my productivity and my sanity. My cousin, Andy, is 28 and the polar opposite of me. He's extroverted, carefree, and seems to attract havoc wherever he goes. Andy and I grew up together, and despite our differences, we've always been close. I think this is largely because of our childhood. Our families were always intertwined, and Andy was like the sibling I never had. Over the years, this bond has persisted, somewhat against all odds since our personalities clash. The last time Andy came to visit me was about 6 months ago. He had some business in the city and asked if he could crash at my place for the week. I hesitated, having heard tales of his previous hosts dealing with Hurricane Andy, but he assured me that he was past his chaotic days and would be the perfect guest. Reluctantly, and perhaps foolishly, I agreed, recalling the good old days and thinking it wouldn't be fair to judge him by stories that might be exaggerated. The first day went by without a hitch. Andy was out most of the time, meeting friends and attending meetings for his work. He returned late, made himself quietly at home on the couch, and I thought perhaps he really had changed. Little did I know, this was just the calm before the storm. On the second night, Andy begged me to let him throw a small get-together for a few friends he hadn't seen in years. I was hesitant but nostalgic for our past family gatherings, so I agreed on the condition that it was small and ended by a reasonable hour. What transpired, however, was anything but small. His few friends turned out to be over 20 people, crammed into my small apartment. They brought booze, snacks, and music, all without my consent. The noise was unbearable. I tried to be a good sport about it, but when I got complaints from my neighbors and the building's management, I had to step in. I asked Andy to turn it down and encourage everyone to wrap it up. He obliged after some persuasion, though I could tell he wasn't thrilled with having to cut the festivities short. The aftermath of that night was a disaster. My once tidy apartment was littered with red Solo cups, pizza boxes, and God knows what else. Andy promised he'd clean up in the morning, so I tried to let it go and went to bed. However, in the morning turned into later in the afternoon, which eventually became before I leave. Needless to say, cleaning up was mostly left to me because Andy continued to prolong completing simple tasks like taking out the trash or vacuuming the crumbs from the rug. The following days saw more incidents. Andy accidentally spilled a drink on my laptop, rendering it temporarily unusable and nearly jeopardizing my job. Forgot conversations we had about house rules, and borrowed my cologne to spritz around the living room when he couldn't find air freshener after cooking mishap. The week was a nightmare of forgotten promises and increasing chaos. After he left, it took me days to get my apartment back into a habitable state. Though he apologized profusely and even sent me a few gift cards as a peace offering, the experience left me bitter and exhausted. I hoped he'd learned something from this and expected him not to broach the subject of staying over again. Fast forward to last week, Andy contacted me out of the blue. He mentioned he had another work engagement in the city and asked if he could stay with me again. The fear I felt wasn't irrational. I couldn't afford another week like the last. My work schedule was more demanding than ever, and accommodating Andy's lifestyle wouldn't just be inconvenient. It could be catastrophic. With a lump in my throat, I decided to be upfront and told him I wasn't comfortable having him over again after what happened last time. And he didn't take it well. He reasoned that since we were family, I should be more forgiving and willing to give him another chance. He also mentioned he had changed and learned from last time, assuring me things would be different. Although I appreciated his apology, my previous experience was too fresh in my mind. I offered to help him find an affordable Airbnb or a hotel nearby, but this only seemed to worsen his mood. Since then, Andy's been distant, and word has gotten back to me through family channels that he's upset and feels like I'm holding a grudge over a minor inconvenience. Some of my family agrees with him, saying I'm being too harsh and reminding me of all the times Andy and his family have hosted me during holidays. Others say I'm justified, knowing full well how Andy's personality and behavior can clash with mine. But even those who support my decision have dropped hints that maybe I should lighten up, extend an olive branch, or at least have a conversation to patch things up and set clearer boundaries. Deep down, part of me wonders if I'm being overly harsh. After all, it wasn't as if Andy's actions were malicious. They were just thoughtless. The truth is, I do miss the camaraderie and the laughter that comes with having Andy around when things aren't going haywire. It's been a point of reflection these past few days, weighing the value of holding firm with my boundaries against the value of maintaining family bonds. So, Reddit, am I the asshole for refusing to give Andy another chance, even though he says he's changed? Would I be unreasonable to stand my ground in prioritizing my peace and sanity, or should I give him the benefit of the doubt this time, after his apologies and assurances? AITA for refusing to financially support my parents after discovering their past misuse of my college fund? I've always believed in the value of family and the importance of being there for one another. This belief was tested recently in a way that has left me questioning my own principles. I'm hoping for some perspective here. For background, I grew up in a modest household. Money was always tight, but my parents instilled in me the importance of education, constantly reminding me that they were saving for my college education. They had a dedicated account for this purpose, and it was understood that when the time came, my education would be covered, within reason, of course. Being an only child, I felt this was their primary financial goal for me. When the time came for me to head to college, I was overjoyed to be accepted into a reputable university that was not too far from home, but my excitement soon turned into confusion and disappointment. Despite years of assurances, my parents sat me down and told me they couldn't actually cover my tuition, let alone additional costs like room, board, and textbooks. Instead, I found myself taking out student loans and working multiple part-time jobs to get through school. It was hard, but I managed to graduate with a degree in engineering. Fast forward to a couple of years after graduation. I lucked out and secured a decent job with a salary that allowed me to live comfortably as well as chip away at my student loans. However, about 2 months ago, my parents asked to have a serious talk with me. My father had lost his job, and my mother's retail gig wasn't providing enough to cover their expenses. Consequently, They asked if I could help them financially. Initially, I was open to helping. After all, they were my parents, and I felt a duty to support them in their time of need, just as they had intended to support me with my education. So, I started by covering some of their utility bills and helping with groceries. I even sat with them to review their budget to find ways to cut unnecessary expenses. But then something unforeseen happened. While sorting through some old paperwork in my parents' home as part of organizing their expenses better, I stumbled upon bank statements showing significant withdrawals from what was supposed to be my college fund. The money was never there when I needed it for school. My assumption that financial struggles had forced them to use those funds didn't match with the amounts that were gone or the statement periods. I confronted them about it, and after some hesitation, they confessed. Over the years, they had used the funds for expensive vacations, remodeling parts of the house, and even to buy a new car years back for my dad, disguising it as essential for his work. They assured me they had only intended to borrow the money, underestimating how much they would need and promising themselves they'd replenish it before I started college. That never happened. Their confession left me shell-shocked. The years of struggling to manage jobs while studying and the anxiety over accumulating student debt flashed before my eyes. I felt betrayed. The people who had always taught me about responsibility and planning for the future had casually sidelined my future for their immediate comforts. After grappling with my emotions for a couple of weeks, I came to a decision. I told my parents that I would no longer be able to support them financially. I explained how their actions had affected me and that I needed some time to process everything. They were hurt and disappointed, and even though they apologized repeatedly, they have also tried to argue that it was in the past and that families should help each other, especially as they're struggling. My friends are split on this. Some understand my stance, while others think I should put it behind me and help my parents, regardless of their financial mistakes. It's been a constant mental battle to reconcile the anger I feel with the guilt I harbor over their current plight. The holidays are approaching, and the tension is palpable. My parents still hope for a change of heart, while I struggle between principle and obligation. The sense of betrayal hasn't diminished, and I'm not sure if it ever will. I've always believed family comes first, but this feels like a betrayal of that very concept. Am I the asshole for refusing to financially support my parents after discovering how they mishandled my college fund? Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.